How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today in the pod, we're going to be talking with Adam Campbell. He is a professional trail runner, former professional triathlete, ultra runner, mountaineer, alpinist. The guy has done it all. He also works with Arc'teryx on product development and a number of other things. Really interesting guy. He goes really vulnerable with me. We get to talk about him getting struck by lightning. We talk about him having crazy 100+ foot falls, but he came back from. And it's just different strategies in his life, not to speak too lightly of them, but losing his wife in 2020, which is a terrible thing. But it also comes around with the joy because he is now engaged to be married again. So really appreciate Adam coming on and sharing his story. And I won't give away too many more details, but I hope you really enjoyed this heartfelt and meaningful conversation with Adam Campbell.
I have to be done at 10:30.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Cool. Yeah.
No worries. Yeah. 10:30 Pacific, right?
Pacific. Yeah. I have an hour and a half. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I guess no one else will hear the previous conversation that we started before my internet totally crapped out on us. But I guess I should say again, thank you for making the time to come on and have a chat. Looking forward to diving into your story. As I was doing more research, I was like, man, there's definitely not enough time to ask all these questions, but I'm really looking forward to it because there's just so much content and it could go a million different ways. So thank you for making the time.
Oh, well, no, thanks for having me. And that's kind of, everybody has, has different stories to tell.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on sort of how broad or how deep you want to go on anything. So.
Oh man, if there's one thing I like, it's going deep. So I look forward to jumping into it for sure.
Yeah.
But
right.
yeah. So how you doing right now, man?
Well, things are good. Yeah, no, actually, kind of an exciting time. I just recently got engaged.
Congratulations. I saw that.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's exciting. And I think you're talking a little bit about sort of the spectrum of life, and I definitely have been able to experience that. And part of that spectrum is experiencing love and happiness, and lucky to be in a place where I get to experience that. So
yeah, that's awesome, man. So where are you at right now?
I'm in Squamish, at our home in Squamish, British Columbia. I've been living here for about 4 years, and yeah, it's a really, really special part of the world. For anybody who doesn't know, it's just sort of like northwest of Vancouver, in between Vancouver and Whistler. We're right at the end of the Howe Sound, so we're on the ocean, but like right where the mountains meet the ocean, so it's a fjord. And it's a really famous sort of like adventure sports capital in North America, and especially in Canada. We've got world-class rock climbing right here. The Chief is sort of like the Yosemite of Canada, big granite domes. We got the ocean, so really a lot of people are really into like wind sports here, a lot of kiting. We don't have like surfing waves, but a lot like really, really strong winds being at the end of a fjord. World-class kayaking because we've got big glaciated peaks that all melt off. Obviously, the trail running and mountain biking is very famous, and the one thing people don't know is we actually have really, really good backcountry skiing right in our backyard as well. There's a little gondola that goes from the ocean up 1,000 meters, so like just over 3,000 feet.
Yeah,
and that takes you above the rainforest into snowline, and then we've got a little mountain range back there that you can go and do some amazing ski touring. Steep skiing if you're into that, a little bit of mountaineering, and it makes for amazing alpine access in the summer. And also the cool thing is you can hike up a really steep trail. So it goes up about, once again, 1,000 meters and like just under 2 miles or around 2 miles. And best part about it is I'm allowed to take my dog on the gondola. So I can.
Oh, that's awesome.
It takes about an hour to hike up at like a bit of a, if you're kind of hurrying, 40 minutes if you're really, really trying to sort of run. But you can head up there and the dog loves it. So it's awesome.
That's really neat. What kind of dog do you have?
A red heeler. Her name is Scarlet.
Yeah, nice. I think I've seen.
She came with. Luckily, I inherited the dog with the fiance. So.
Okay, nice. Yeah. Past puppy stage, or we got?
Yeah, she's 5, but she's a healer, so there's still some psycho in her. So.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, dude, so just reading a little bit about you, and even just from the past couple of minutes of things you've been sharing there's a lot to do, but you have been involved in the worlds of triathlon, duathlon, mountaineering, ultra running, sky running, as you call it, like so many different things. So for you, I guess my first question is, like, who is Adam?
Well, I mean, who's Adam? I mean, I'm somebody who's just like really a deeply curious person, and part of my curiosity involves expressing myself physically and moving through environments and exploring that way. And I've been lucky to get to experience life in a variety of different forms.
Mm.
Well, if you want to like go deep, I grew up in West Africa. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. Both my parents were Canadian, but I was born in England,
Mm.
and we moved to Nigeria when I was 9 months old. So from a very young age, I kind of lived, I guess, an alternative, different style
Yeah.
of I don't know, than a lot of typical North American kids.
Yeah.
Traveled around Africa quite a bit, and we had a sort of, I don't know, best way of describing it's like a summer home, a vacation home in southern Spain. So we'd go to Spain for most of our vacations, and that's sort of where I first fell in love with sort of the mountains because it was up
Mm.
in the hills in southern Spain, and yeah, so I don't know, yeah. So I guess that's who I am. I guess somebody
Yeah.
who's been fortunate to travel the world quite extensively throughout my life. Still a a proud Canadian,
Yeah.
but and I have a maple leaf and everything, but yeah, just deeply curious about the world, and
Mm.
as I say, part of that is expressing myself physically. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So the outdoors is obviously a big piece of who you are, and it sounds like you said, when you were younger, getting to Spain at a relatively young age, like that started to instill in you maybe the love for the mountains and everything that that can entail.
yeah.
But what is it about the outdoors that like you really enjoy that drives you to be motivated to do the things you do? And also, like when specifically do you have like a few set of memories or experiences you had that really kind of cemented in your mind like, oh, the outdoors is something that motivates me, or like it gets me driven to go and figure out what else there
Yeah,
is?
I mean, so for people who don't know, Nigeria is in West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the joke is it's the armpit of Africa, just like the way Africa kind of curves, and it's had some political instability and things
Yeah.
over the years. But it's where I grew up. Lagos is right on the coast. So I grew up on the ocean. So ironically, my childhood was actually in the tropics
Mm.
on on beaches, and I grew up sailing and sort of playing in the ocean. And I think that's probably where my initial love of the outdoors came from.
Wow.
We also had like a backyard with like tropical trees and things like that. So I spent a lot of my childhood just playing outside, playing soccer, and just playing in the waves. And I think I first felt my like sense of freedom through sailing.
Mm.
We sailed lasers and Hobie cats, so Hobie 16s, these like little catamaran boats. And I think there was just, I don't know, as a kid being able to get on the ocean, this incredible expanse of water,
Mm.
and getting to interact with the elements. And it's interesting because you're at the mercy of the elements, but so it's sort of learning how to dance with them, which is what sailing and racing sailboats is all about. Sort
Mm.
of reading the signs that nature is giving you. And so I think I first came to really appreciate the outdoors through that. And then one childhood memory that I have, which was pretty strong, is from a young age. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but my dad and I walked from the ocean up to our house in Spain,
Okay.
and it felt like it was like climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
And it was for a little kid, say I was like 4 or 5. It was like a really, really deep, profound memory for
Mm.
me, and I think I just blabbed the entire way up the mountain, and
Yeah.
but it was sort of the first like hard thing I remember doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that was it. Sort of had, it was one of those like funny memories that had like a lasting effect on me.
Yeah, it's interesting how we do experience so many things, but those like key little keystone memories, especially around childhood, because we don't remember everything, obviously, from like younger ages. But five's pretty young, but it's cool to see how those things do impact the way that we kind of view the world as we get older.
I was probably actually 12, but in my mind I was
Okay.
5. So
Okay.
yeah, the memory is also, we also lie to ourselves.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
but it doesn't
Memories
matter. The
definitely.
story's better if I was 5,
Yeah,
like
exactly. No, I like that. I like the visual.
yeah, totally.
Were you an only child?
No, I have a younger brother.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and we're quite close. It's funny because we have gone through slightly different paths in life,
Hmm.
but we're still very, very close. We spend a lot of our childhood together, and just especially having a bit of a unique upbringing. We spent a lot of time playing together or fighting,
Yeah.
life fighting, whatever you want to call it. And I think that our interests were different enough growing up, and our personalities were different enough that we weren't actually competitive with each other, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I was just better at sports than him. So
Yeah. So you said different paths. Like what are the differences? Like what kind of a path is he on still?
Oh, well, I mean, so actually it's kind of cool. He's just recently taken up running, but
Okay.
and he just ran a half marathon on the weekend, and he's doing a trail running race. So I'm super, just one of those like proud big brother moments.
Yeah.
But he was more into CrossFit and like really focused on business interests, and he's a family with three kids, and all of his kids, he's married to a Swedish woman.
Okay.
But all three of his kids were born in Thailand. They were
Oh
living
wow.
in Bangkok, and he was involved in business there. He met his Swedish wife in China, but they now have relocated to southern Spain. So they actually live close to my
Okay.
dad. My brother's in the real estate world down there. But,
Okay, cool. Is
yeah.
your mom in the picture as well?
Yeah, no, my mom lives on Vancouver Island.
Okay.
So my parents split up when I was 16 or 17.
Mm.
And my mom left Nigeria, moved to Canada, and now lives. It's not actually that far away from where we are, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a ferry ride
Yeah.
away. So yeah, it's about an
Yeah.
hour and a half ferry from here, and a really beautiful ferry ride.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
gorgeous part. I have some friends who live up in Orcas Island, if you know where that is. I'm sure
Oh
you
yeah,
do.
totally. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a really quite a well-known 50K and 100 miler, the Orca on Orcas Island. Yeah, my
Oh, that's
mom
so fun.
lives just outside of Victoria, British Columbia.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a big triathlon hub, a big training hub over there. Some great, great 70.3s, and
Yeah.
it's actually that's where I first got really serious into sport. I was in Victoria, training at the National Triathlon Center, and got to meet the likes of like Simon Whitfield, who became one of my best
Mm-hmm.
friends, and Greg Bennett was there, and we had people like Hamish Carter coming through, and
Yeah.
Craig Walton, and Peter Reed, and Laurie Bowden, and Jasper Blake. So things like and Kirsten Sweetland and Paula Finley spent some time there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just this like really interesting hub of high performance sport that I got immersed in.
Yeah. What was your first interaction with the sport of triathlon and like what got you into it?
Yeah. So from a young age, you're, like if I've always really enjoyed running, sort of, running the mile, and,
Mm-hmm.
soccer practice. I was a guy who liked doing extra laps and stuff.
Yeah.
And I grew up swimming in the ocean. But yeah, so triathlon sort of came to me in a bit of a funny way. I was working for Outward Bound, doing canoe guiding
Okay.
one summer when I was 18, just turning 19. It was sort of the very end of high school. And I was in this remote part of Northern Ontario, and there was a guy there training for a triathlon. And so in between our sort of canoe trips, be gone for like 5 days to 30 days, depending on the trip we were on.
Mm-hmm.
When we were back at our sort of base camp, I would train with him, and we go for these like really fun runs along dirt paths. And I had like a really crappy mountain bike that would sort of pedal along the dusty roads along, and then swimming in the lake. And when I finished this, I signed up for a triathlon. It happened to be the Canadian Junior Triathlon Championships, which I was sort of unaware of at the time.
Okay.
And this is back when juniors were still doing Olympic distance
Yeah.
races, and it was stupidly hot out. It was, yeah, I don't know Fahrenheit, but it was about 40 degrees Celsius, 100% humidity, just
Yeah. It's
crazy
like
hot.
90 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah, 90, maybe hotter than 90.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, basically it just became this giant race of attrition. And having grown up in Africa, being a smaller guy, I ended up having a good result and qualifying for the Canadian junior national team at that race. And this was in 1999.
Okay.
And I got to compete at the World Championships, which were held in Montreal that year.
Hmm.
They were on the F1 circuit.
Oh, that's cool.
And so this was the year before the 2000 Olympics, where triathlon was making its debut.
Mm-hmm.
And Simon qualified himself for the Olympics at that race. I think he had to finish, top 10 or something, and at the World Champs, and he ended up finishing eighth. And I remember it was a really cool race between Simon Lessing and Dimitri Gag. And there's sort of all these like tactics, and
Mm-hmm.
it basically came down to a running race. just based on the nature of the circuit. And yeah, there was like all these like, people were surging and stuff. I was like, oh, this is the coolest sport ever.
Yeah.
And getting to watch Simon qualify was really cool. And then the next year, I had started college at Queen's University, which is in Kingston, Ontario, and that's Simon's hometown.
Okay.
Um, and watching Simon win the Olympic gold there, I'd gotten more heavily into triathlon at this point. I was like, oh, I'm into this sport. I want to commit to it a little bit, and I joined a training group and was starting to actually train more, learning how to train
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, for sure.
I had a great coach mentor at the time, Randy Zabukovic.
Okay.
And there were also Sharon Donnelly, who qualified for the Canadian Olympic team, was from Kingston, and Jamie Cleveland, who was a top-ranked Canadian Ironman athlete at the time.
Hmm.
We're all training there, and so I instantly got into this once again high-performance culture.
Yeah, that lifestyle.
Yeah, it was cool, and then getting to cheer on Simon. It was pretty wild. And then I got to meet him later that fall, which kind of changed my life quite dramatically, actually. So yeah.
Yeah. How so?
Well, I was on the university cross country team, and
Okay.
Simon came out and ran with us, and we did a few intervals, and I was sort of keeping up with Simon, or at least in my mind, I was keeping up with
Yeah.
him. He's probably on like a bender after winning an Olympic gold, and
Yeah.
was totally exhausted, and it was kind of being nice to us. But anyway, we did this interval workout, and we got to chatting, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you're into triathlon," and he's like, "You're a pretty decent runner. You should take this triathlon thing a bit more seriously.
Hmm.
If you want, we have this training group out in Victoria,
Got
and
the job.
which is on the other side of the country. For anybody who doesn't know, it's, I don't know, 4,000 kilometers,
Yeah.
west of where we are.
Yeah.
And that sounded much more interesting to me than university at the time, which I was very much just deep into the triathlon world, or into training. And yeah, so I kind of mulled this over a little bit and talked to my coach about it, and he's like, "This is kind of a cool opportunity." And so I literally packed my bags and flew across the country and phoned Simon and said, "I'm here." He said, "What do you
Yeah.
mean you're here?" I was like, "Well, I'm at the Victoria Airport." And he was like, "Well, do you have a place to stay?" And I was like, "Well, not really." And ended up
I
crashing
love
at
it.
Simon's place.
Nice. Perfect.
Yeah, it was just kind of wild. And then yeah, showing up on the pool deck the next morning and literally seeing Greg Bennett and Simon and
Mm.
like Brent McMahon and all these people in the pool. I was like, oh my God, what am
Yeah.
I, who am I here with? So it was pretty cool. Yeah.
If you were to break up the sources of motivation into almost like percentages, those being, a percentage of the motivation to go out there was like, oh, I, as an individual, like, I feel like I can do this. And then obviously it sounds like Simon was a pivotal influence and like getting you to make that step into this world. So maybe you wanted to, I don't know, connect with him, be cool, whatever it was. Like, how would you break up those different pieces of motivation, and like what was the biggest chunk of the reason you think that you decided to make that jump?
Well, I think there's a few. I think honestly, it was outside belief.
Mm.
It was just people telling me that you could do this something interesting, and so I had, as I said, a really good coach in Kingston, Randy Zabukovic. I had talked to Lance Watson, who was coaching at the National Center and out there, and same thing. He's like, "Oh yeah, you've got some fast running, which is sort of critical to this sport, and obviously having the Olympic gold medalist saying, you should come
Yeah,
and check this out. We're
I'll stoke the
pretty,
fire.
yeah, pretty big drivers, and I was also lucky in that my family supported it. And we're like, yeah, if it's something you want to pursue, go for it. But it's like this, kind of with like a lot of hesitation. But they helped me financially to actually make that happen, which was really, I was really fortunate for as
Mm.
well. And also my partner at the time was also, her name was Lauren Groves, and she ended up qualifying for the Beijing Olympics as well. So she was also, she also kind of believed in the program. So there was a few like
Yeah,
factors, and then
confluence.
yeah, and also I think maybe having, once again, it's really hard to know, but maybe having led a bit of an unconventional life, I was more willing to go down a different path as well. And I just, as I say, I wasn't feeling super motivated by academia at the time,
Hmm.
which was funny because I'd always been very academically driven. And I'd always really loved school, but for whatever reason, college wasn't quite clicking with me, and maybe I just wasn't in the right environment, or I'd found this new passion, and so I think a lot of it was just kind of curiosity to follow this passion.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the expectations you had or kind of the vision in your mind for what this was going to be versus what it actually ended up being.
Well, I mean, the vision for what it was going to be was I was going to become world champion in 6 months, and I was going to
6 months, I love
start crushing Simon.
it. Yeah.
The reality
Put him in the grave.
yeah, exactly. The reality is they were much fitter, much better trained, and just more talented than I was
Yeah.
in that area of sport. I quickly realized that the level of work required to get there, and just the amount of hard training that those guys did was something else, and
Hmm.
it was really, really impressive. And then I also learned though that there was like other sides to the sport as well. I really learned about the profession of being a professional athlete.
Hmm.
So there's the physical performance side of it, but then watching Simon, constantly doing media interviews, dealing with sponsors, same with people like Peter Reed, navigating agents at different times, and doing it with different levels of success, and sort of how they actually made it work was really interesting. And at that point, race results were still like a really key driver of what your sort of how much money you'd make in the sport, because you appear in magazines and that kind of stuff, and that has shifted quite a bit.
Hmm.
Since 2000, there's
Yeah.
much, like there was I think I probably signed up for my first Facebook account in like 2002, 2003. And it was a very different platform then than it is now.
Hmm.
And same with things like what was then Twitter. I remember Simon convinced me to get on Twitter for the first time, saying, "Oh, this is a great place to sort of share what you're doing training wise and stuff."
Hmm.
But yeah, so it was a very different media and sponsorship landscape back then.
Hmm.
And yeah.
So I'm curious if you don't mind me asking and kind of prying a little bit, but with the sports stuff, obviously there's a lot of demands physically, mentally, businessly, figuring out what that looks like. There's a lot of discipline required. And oftentimes I found that going through adversity is what really gives us the tools and the ability to have a different perspective and a different game plan for how to move forward. So like you said, I think you were 16, like your parents separated, and 16 is a very pivotal age, especially for a man. And I've heard it also likened to whenever there's divorces that happen. Sometimes it's even like there's a death in the family. It's like you're trying to like grapple with all that. So as you are growing up and coming to this place of getting serious into triathlon, there's not a huge gap in years there. How did that inform or how did that affect the kind of the goals and the directions that you took with triathlon?
Yeah. So interestingly, I'd gone away to boarding school
Okay.
at that point. So yeah, so I left Nigeria when I was 16 and I went to boarding school in Canada.
Okay.
And so I actually wasn't around for like, what I think was like quite a acrimonious time between my parents.
Mm.
And I think it was it was a messy split up, and my brother was there for that. And
Mm.
I think it had a bigger direct impact on him. My dog just made an appearance in the background.
I
Yeah.
love it. That'd be perfect.
Yeah. Scarlet. Yeah. It's good to have a supervisor.
That's right.
But I would say going to boarding school, was that did change my sort of direction quite dramatically, and I became quite independent, and I didn't see my parents that much
Mm.
after that. But where maybe it did have an impact is because my parents were kind of finding themselves after being married for a number of years. Maybe they actually had a bigger tolerance for me kind of going down my own path as well. Had they been together or a different life, maybe they would have been like, no, you got to stay on this like academic path, and not as being as supportive of me
Mm.
questing on my own, because as I say, they were on their own life quest. My mom, went back to university, after, my mom and my dad met when when she was 19,
Mm.
and she never went to college. So she went back to college. So we were actually going through university at the same time,
Oh,
which is kind of
interesting.
cool.
Yeah.
And she actually got her undergrad a little bit before me because, I dropped out.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah. So it did have an impact.
Sure.
but not necessarily maybe in the way that you're, maybe leading towards, if that
Yeah,
makes
yeah, yeah,
sense.
for sure.
Yeah.
No, no, no. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting just hearing the different perspectives. And yeah, the independence is a huge thing. And you alluded to the fact that there was a little bit of hesitation from your parents in terms of the direction that you were taking. What point, and maybe I'm sure it has arrived now, but at what point did you feel, especially from your dad, like a sense of, oh, he's proud of me, or like I made the right decision and he really accepts what I'm doing?
Yeah, well, no, so I think he's always accepted what I'm doing. He's always been a very and same with my mom, very open-minded, kind of just trust me to make, you know, smart life choices and sort of go down a path. But they've also, as I say, I've been really fortunate. I've done this with a safety net, through a large chunk of it. My family did, my dad and my grandpa especially were both, very academically driven people.
Hmm.
Like my dad, went to law school, has a master's and a master's of law, and my grandpa was a Canadian ambassador and was a diplomat and, in the Canadian Foreign Service, and then was involved deeply in the civil service back in Canada. And so I think he questioned a lot more, like, what the heck is this guy doing?
Yeah.
I'm throwing my life away. And he's like, oh, you're always like a top student, and now you're choosing to run around in a Speedo. It's like,
A generational difference there, for
yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah, no, it wasn't. I think that there was maybe some questions there. But at the same time, I think they saw my passion and were supportive of that. And, um, they've always come, as I said, my dad and, followed his passions, and his passions took him to work abroad internationally. And, so I think he respected that. Yeah.
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 Respect is a huge key, a
Yeah.
huge piece of it for sure, to
Yeah.
at least for me. So with your mom and your dad, who are you more like?
I'm more like my dad. I'm definitely
Yeah.
more like my dad. Yeah. My mom is my biggest supporter, 100%. But I'm definitely more like my dad. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said your dad was a lawyer, and I believe that you also are a lawyer. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So with the triathlon thing, I gave it a very good shot on the World Cup circuit, and I won a Canadian duathlon championship, and but I was just never really able to nail the swim in ITU racing. And while I became like a decent swimmer, I think I swam like 18:30 or 18:45 for a 1500. That's really not cutting it at the
Mm,
World Cup level. And what I really lacked was explosive power, especially at the start of swims. Like I could never swim, like I could do maybe like a 105 100 meters, which, you're already 10 seconds off the back. And being a smaller guy, I was just getting pummeled. And
yeah.
it's not like, I'm also 120, at the time I was like 120 pounds. So I wasn't exactly pushing out the big watts to be able to, close the gaps.
Mm,
So if the race was really hot and if the bike packs came together, I could sometimes use my run, to get a decent result at, like a lower ranked ITU race, but I was just never able to be competitive in the ITU circuit. So I gave it a go until about 2006. And then my partner at the time, Lauren, was doing quite well on the ITU circuit, and it looked like she was going to be qualifying for the Olympics. And so I essentially retired from triathlon at that point and became the national team manager. So I
oh,
could
cool.
still support her and Simon and my other friends who were trying to qualify for the Olympics. And through that, I went back and took some college courses to sort of get my just to do something. I also started trail running at the time. I'd always loved trail running, and I wanted to stay fit. I didn't want to, I've always loved training the most. Like I just love
Hmm.
training. I love being physical, and trail running was the aspect of our training that I enjoyed the most. And it seemed like the longer our runs went, the better I did relative to the other, athletes.
Yeah.
I,
Diesel engine.
yeah, I signed up for first marathon, and actually Greg Bennett coached me to my first marathon, which was pretty cool.
Cool.
And jumped in some trail running races and made the Canadian mountain running team at that time as well. But I also wrote the LSATs, and in writing the LSATs, I got a fairly decent score.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple universities in Canada where you don't actually need an undergraduate degree to go to law school.
Oh, that's
You just
awesome.
have to have done a couple years and have had like an interesting life story and have done and done well on the LSAT. And luckily, I was able to write a decent enough letter, had enough sort of letters of recommendation, and got accepted to law school as well.
Wow.
So right after the Beijing Olympics, where unfortunately Lauren crashed and broke her collarbone
Mm.
and wrist, and wasn't able to finish, and Simon got a
Yeah.
silver medal with
Mm-hmm.
another sort of amazing sprint finish with Ian Frodeno. I started law school that fall. So yeah.
Yeah. When you got back into the academic world, just because of the life experience you had, did you find it more like you were obviously pretty motivated and driven, or
No, I
was
loved
it
it.
hard? Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
super psyched to be there. I think I was 29. Yeah, I was 29 when I went back to school.
Okay.
I was super driven. I found everything I was studying so interesting. I found law school just absolutely fascinating.
Mm.
And yeah, I was all in. I was all in on law school and still, running trails and doing the mountain racing thing at the time. But yeah, I loved it.
Mm. It's so interesting. I wish that it was almost a requirement for all college age students to be, because I think a lot of college age students, like you naturally have some genetic fitness because you're younger, your metabolism's high and whatnot. But I wish it was a requirement to do some type of a sport physically, because I feel like it enables you to have the ability to process and just go through things that are academic a bit easier. At least that was the case for me when I first started school. Hated it. Started actually being a little active. Like I found it much more easy to focus, get some of the energy down, get it down to the base needs of what's going on with the physical body, and being able to sit there and focus.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily know. So I think, I think we maybe have a physical bias. I think having some sort of an outlet is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people that could be art. Some people it could be music,
True.
or writing. But I think different people process, it could be going for a walk. I think we maybe have a bias towards like, high output physical activity and we're really lucky to have that as an outlet. But I do think having something outside of just pure academia helps a massive amount for that
Yeah. Keep the
processing time. And
balance.
yeah, I do think that everybody should be out walking more, but I also think that a lot of athletes should be spending more time cultivating arts as well, and
Mm-hmm.
doing some drawing maybe or doing some writing. I
Yeah.
think we could all afford to be better rounded humans.
Yeah, for sure. So are you artistic, musical, any of those?
No, so I'm not musical at all. I really enjoy writing, and I do a little bit of sketching and drawing and painting, but like I'm not good at it, but I do enjoy doing it
Sure.
on occasion. Actually, funny enough, it was like about a month ago, my fiance and I went to a art class and we did a watercolor night.
Oh,
And
cool.
I was blown away how, actually, sorry, it was oil painting. It was oil painting,
Okay.
not a watercolor, it was oil painting. But 3 hours just disappeared.
Yeah.
Like what I ended up with was, very basic. And it
Yeah.
was not at all like anybody else in the class, but it was awesome. It was just a
Yeah.
really cool outlet. And yeah, so I do a little bit of sketching here and there, but
Mm.
yeah, not a lot, but
Yeah.
yeah.
When you draw and sketch, do you erase or do you always keep what's going and just try to add and adjust
No, I just
based?
add and adjust. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I love the mistakes. I think the mistakes are a super interesting part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
with my writing, I'll do a lot more editing of it because
Mm-hmm.
I typically I like to share and post the writing I do, but with my drawing, it's personal.
Yeah.
So yeah. But
Yeah.
even with my writing though, I find I often will post something. I kind of just believe in just like getting it out there, and then I will potentially keep editing it a little bit once it's posted. But I kind of just like to, there's some like courage in just sharing it. So
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah, it's super interesting. I enjoy writing as well, and normally though I post it because I think it's done, and then I get it out there and I'm like, oh, look at all those mistakes, and I'm trying to edit it and post after I
yeah,
do it because yeah,
totally.
whatever the dyslexia and whatnot. But it's
Yeah.
interesting. I asked about the drawing because one of the most important lessons I think that my father taught me, because he was an artist. He did watercolor and painting and drawing and whatnot, and when at a young age, I'm comparing everything that I'm putting down to his, and it just looked like absolutely marvelous. And then I look at mine and I'm like, oh, this just looks like chicken scratch. And so you're constantly erasing the same line, trying to get it perfectly straight or whatever it is. But it was a valuable lesson because I realized that with the right artistic view and patience, something that you initially start to draw and work the wireframe for, it doesn't look that impressive. But as you start to add the accents and you add more over time, like you can transfer it into something or transform it into something much more beautiful. And that only is enabled without erasing. And I feel like that was such a lesson for life, like to be able to not just want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and, restart at the beginning, like adding stuff to that house or that room in the house or whatever, adding different furniture pieces, adding different lighting, like it can change the entire view of what you've got that you're creating.
Yeah, I mean, and the one thing I think that our art and the way we probably approach these things is quite a good reflection of sort of what our personalities are. Like, so I'm not a very organized person, or I have my own form of organization, which is disorganized
Yeah, yeah.
chaos. Whereas my brother is a very, very organized person. Like he needs to know where everything is at all times and likes to have like a lot of planning. And he's very artistic, but his art is very linear with what he does, and it's very like angular and I think he will have an endpoint in mind and he will try to make his art as close to the endpoint in mind as possible, and he'll work towards that. Whereas with my drawing, I'm very, I may have like an idea of something I want to draw, like a tree or something,
Hmm.
but I've never actually ended up with anything that looks at all like
Remotely
that
like it.
tree.
Yeah.
I kind of just follow the vagaries of whatever happens, and a large part of that's just I'm not trained or talented enough to actually know how to manipulate, the paint or the colors or the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
lines to actually end up where I want. So I end up having to follow them where they want to go instead.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So,
No, that makes sense. Yeah. No, I've been there. It's interesting, like you said, the angular stuff. Like I'm very much like that. Lots of shapes and just weird looking stuff but
Mhm.
I love going back afterwards and be like, oh wow, did I draw that? Oh, that's interesting. But it's with the more abstract stuff, you can always look at it differently each time, and you kind of something else kind of stands out to you, which sounds a
Totally.
little woo woo. And some people may not like art or even this discussion, but I am fascinated with the fact that you can always go back and look at something visually later, and depending on the frame of mindset that I'm in, I will see something different. And yeah, you
No, I
can.
mean, and it is interesting. I think also with things like art, what we're told from a young age, like you're told that you're an artist or you're musical or not, has like a really big impact later on in life. And the other thing I really enjoy doing is, you say some people say they don't like art. I'm so curious as to why. Like
Yeah.
explore those points of resistance. What is it about art that you don't like? What bothers you about it? And sort of going down that path and sort of uncovering that, I think can answer some really interesting questions for you.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Why do you think people don't like art?
Well, once again, I mean, it's a very, very personal thing. Some people don't like the subjectivity of it. Some people, once again, may have been told from a young age that they weren't great artists, or they were trying to compare themselves to somebody, and it just didn't work out well. Like I was told from a young age by one of my early musical teachers that I'm just not very musical, and that's like stuck with me.
Uh,
And I have this like big resistance towards music. And, like I'm not like I legitimately know I can't carry a tune, but
yeah.
but that holds me back from ever trying.
Mm,
Which is interesting and kind of too bad. But
mm. Talk to me a little bit about the power of belief and the power of words that you have or we have on others and that others have on us.
oh, I mean, I think it's everything. We're just like a compilation of narratives that we tell ourselves and stories that we tell ourselves or that other people have told us. You can do some introspection, but if influential people in your life, teachers, parents, grandparents, whoever, friends, tell you something, that does shape, the direction that you end up going in life. So I do think that those words can really have like and even something a stranger says. I mean, imagine if somebody walked up to you, like a total random person walked up to you when you're, I don't know, 12 and says, you're ugly. Like that would like, you would remember that.
Yeah, that's impactful for sure.
That
Yeah.
would be impactful. That would like, like really stay with you for a large part. And maybe part of you be like, why did that person say that? Maybe I am ugly. Maybe I've done something.
Mm.
So I do think that those things can have like a big shape, can really shape who you are, if for
Yeah.
the positive or negative. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then also your reaction to them as well can deeply impact you. It'd be like, imagine if as a 12-year-old, you're like, okay, that person said that. That's too bad for them, but they feel that way. I believe that I am beautiful.
Mm, yeah.
That would also be like a really profound moment in your life.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it totally, I mean, some people just naturally have, I think, a lot of grit and resilience to be able to resist that. But oftentimes I think that comes from like prior experience or people who are like speaking that level of life back into who you are as an individual. Like having someone reaffirming, especially like the father and mother figures in our life. I feel like those are so important to just giving us the tools as we get older to be able to combat some of those negative voices that we end up believing about ourselves. Because it's amazing. You can say five good things and then one negative thing kind of just erases it just by the laws of however the emotion tends to work. It's pretty wild.
No, you just read just look at the comments on, and you gotta
Oh,
so
dude.
you post the
I
one negative one is the one that stays with you.
literally we have probably over 100 reviews now, and for whatever reason a few weeks ago I was going through some of the analytics just kind of seeing where things were at, and I read this one terrible review and it just wrecked me in a way that made me so very uncomfortable because I typically would consider myself like a pretty gritful guy, but I don't know. I guess I was living in this space where I thought everybody would like what I'm doing all the time. But for whatever reason, found it or not, that person wrote that terrible review and it just, man, it messed with me. And so I realized like, oh, I can't read those anymore because it's
Yeah.
not healthy. The good and the bad ones, by the way. Because I
Well,
think
yeah.
that,
No,
yeah,
no,
it's
'cause you can
just,
also get like an, I don't know, false sense of inflated ego or whatever for
yeah.
your positive.
Yeah, exactly. You can pay people for good reviews too. So it's like,
Totally.
yeah, what
Yeah.
does it actually mean? So around this topic of mindset and belief, you have again gone through some crazy things. Like 2014, I'd love to hear about this situation where you got struck by lightning. First of all, what's it like to be struck by lightning?
Yeah. So I can give a little bit of context. So I was doing a race called the Hard Rock 100,
Hmm.
which is, it's one of the more challenging 100 milers, which is already an oxymoron in itself.
Yeah.
But you cover it's about 33,000 feet of elevation gain and loss over the course of 100 miles, and you're at an average elevation of 11,000 feet. It's in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. There's 140 or 114 participants in the race, so it's a really small field, and it's an incredibly beautiful race. Typically the second or third week in July, so you have these beautiful wildflowers, and um, you go over a 14,000 foot peak called Handy's Peak, and this particular year, so the race alternates directions every year. So this particular year, we were approaching Handy's Peak around mile 60. So, 2/3 of the way. And, you've already run 60 miles, which is a pretty decent length of time to have been out running in the mountains.
At 11,000 feet.
At 11,000 feet. Yeah. Totally. And so you pick up a pacer because you're going to be running through the night, and you're quite remote. And so you're allowed to have somebody come and pace you. They can't carry anything for you, but they can be with you for safety reasons. And as we were approaching this peak, the sun was just setting. And if anybody's been in the mountains in Colorado or in the West, that's typically a time when you want to be out of the mountains. You'll often get like really violent thunderstorms in the area. But this being a race, you don't really get to pick when you're going to be going through the high country. And we could see a storm off in the distance, and we thought that we'd probably be fine to get up and over the peak, and get down to the other side. And so as we're approaching the summit, all of a sudden the wind really started to pick up, and we stopped to put on windbreakers and put our headlamps on. And we were maybe 200 feet from the summit, and it started to just lash rain. It got really, really cold, and we saw the summit get struck by lightning, and we're like, okay, that's really, really bad. There was nowhere with shelter at the time. As I say, it's a bit of a dome peak. There's no real rocks to hide behind or anything. So we decided to push up and over the peak because we knew there were some boulders on the other side. And so as we get to the summit, it sounded like a mortar shell went off. And next thing I knew, both my partner and I were on the ground in pouring rain. I look over at him, and I was like, "Aaron, are you okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm okay. How are you?" I was like, "Well, I'm okay." I was like, "That was pretty, messed up." Yeah.
Few choice words
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And my headlamp had gone out. So what had happened is there was a ground strike beside us, and the current had gone surged through us, and it fried my headlamp, which is kind of wild.
That is wild.
I
Is it
did have a
LED?
spare headlamp in my pack,
Oh,
but we didn't want to mess around with that. And because we were still in the middle of this storm, had Aaron get behind me and with his headlamp and light up the trail. And we ran off the mountain as quickly as possible until we could get down, sort of out of that situation and just do an assessment. Like, are you actually okay? And he's like, yeah,
yeah.
I'm fine. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm okay. I was like, okay, that was kind of crazy. Pulled out my headlamp, and I was in third in this race, and it's quite a prestigious race. And I was kind of surprised to be in third. It was going to be a bit of a monumental result, and I was still feeling great. And so we decided to not tell anybody because I didn't want anybody at the aid
Pull
stations
you down.
to pull us off or do a medical assessment because we both knew we were fine. Um, so there, continued the race and I ended up finishing third. I think it took me about 25 hours to complete the course. And when I finished, though, other people had seen us up on the mountain and sort of word had gotten out that this had happened. And next thing I know,
Wow.
I'm lying in this medical tent, having just run 25 hours through. Um, I was fine, but you're just kind of lying down. You're just really, really
Yeah.
tired. And next thing I know, like CNN is on the call. I'm getting a phone call from CNN. Like, we just heard that you were struck by lightning in the middle of this race and finished third. And do you want to talk about it? I was like, well, not really, because I'm kind of embarrassed, but I'd rather talk about my
Yeah.
about my race result. But anyway, sort of it story kind of got out, and yeah, it's one of those
Yeah.
wild situations. But
Yeah, that
yeah.
is wild. Do you actually remember seeing anything, or is it just like the sound and like it,
No,
did it knock
it
you
was
out?
mostly the sound, and I do remember a bit of a flash. But once again, with these things, it's sort of hard to know whether or not if I genuinely remember it, if I've kind of created
Yeah.
if the story is better than the reality. But it's
Mm.
still a pretty damn good story. So
Yeah, 100%. Well,
yeah,
yeah. So at this point, like you're how many years in are you to being like? I mean, at this point, you are considered professional
yeah,
ultra runner.
yeah. I guess so I got my first professional contract as a trail runner in 2007.
Okay.
I had raced the World Long Distance Mountain Running Championships in Interlaken, Switzerland. It's a really, really cool race called the Jungfrau Marathon,
Hmm.
where you start in Interlaken, this really beautiful, well, actually, it's kind of a very resorty Swiss town, and you run up and you finish at the base of the glacier, right by the Eiger, the Munk, and the Jungfrau peak. And I had a good result there. I think I finished 11th, maybe, and it was my first mountain running world championships and or long distance mountain running world championships, and it was a straight uphill marathon.
Oh wow.
And when I came back, I just started sending cold call emails out to various outdoor brands, and literally sent an email to this company called Arc'teryx. Sent an email to info@arcteryx.com saying mountain and trail running are really starting to take off. Have you guys considered getting into making trail running apparel? And they were a Canadian mountain brand, but I really admired their stuff.
Yeah.
And by this point, I was quite into backcountry skiing and rock climbing as well. Um, and happened to get an email back saying, funny you should mention that. We have been talking about it. How would you like to help us design some clothes? Which was kind of a sick email.
That's awesome.
And
How big is the company at this point? Like they're not
no, they
terribly
were tiny at
huge.
that point. They were less than $100 million in sales.
Okay. It's like small team of like what, 10, 15, something like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, maybe a bit bigger than that. But their factory was still in Vancouver. They were starting to make some stuff overseas at the point.
Hmm.
But I'm still with them, and I'm now an employee at the company. So it was one of those kind of shoot your shot moments, and
Yeah.
luckily I did, and the right person got the email, and yeah, it's been a pretty amazing ride.
Yeah, that is amazing. So what is your official title for with Arc'teryx?
So I have a few roles. So I'm still a sponsored athlete for them. I'm the mountain run team captain, and then
Cool.
my title is I do athlete insights and product testing. So it's basically the coolest job in the world. I
Yeah,
get
you
to
get to
hang out
take
with
the
my
stuff out and
friends.
use it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I get to hang out with my friends in the mountains essentially, and try to find people doing cool stuff. And go and find out what their needs are for their product, how they're using the product, what gaps they have, and then as we start developing product, testing product, finding out where it's breaking and how we can improve it to put out the best possible product.
Mm, that's fascinating. So Arc'teryx, just for a little bit of context for you why I like geeking out about this stuff, but when I was in college, I started this small textile business. We made insulated camping hammocks.
Oh,
And
sick.
so that afforded me the option or the opportunity to go over to Asia and work with different, fabric mills and then the contract manufacturers and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And Arc'teryx was one of the brands that I took a lot of inspiration from in terms of, I mean, the way you guys present yourself is awesome, but the quality, I still have not been able to find that level of quality really in many other brands, maybe one or two where you can kind of make a comparison. But what is it, do you think, about Arc'teryx that you guys do that you carry through all the way from product development to shipping the final product where you're able to keep such an incredibly high quality standard?
One is there is just an emphasis on quality, and that's what the company is known for. So there's just like a lot of checks along the way, and it's a no compromise situation. You will pick the highest quality materials. The finishing details really matter, and if ultimately it just comes down to accountability because if we put out a
Hmm.
product that doesn't meet those standards, it gets called out really quickly.
Called
And
out like you're pulling it back off the
yeah, or
off the
like
ship.
our customers' reviews we
Yeah,
will get called
will
out
reflect it.
if it's not if it doesn't meet the sort of Arc'teryx standards.
Yeah.
We all hold ourselves to that account as well. So the
Mm.
people who work there really want to be working on, most people who work there, especially in the design and development side of things, love the sports as well. So they're passionate users, so they're out testing the gear themselves and making sure that it lives up to those standards.
Yeah.
Like for instance, in our climbing department, we have two climbers who climb 515. They climb 515B, which is like basically
The
some of the best
hardest.
climbers in Canada.
Yeah.
Work as designers internally at the company. They're not
Mm.
sponsored athletes. They're literally making harnesses and testing gloves and stuff. Um, it comes down to that. It comes down to material choices. Basically, our products need to be beautiful and they need to be functional. So if you were to turn the jacket inside out, it would look beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that really matters. And I think that attention to detail is, reflects in the product ultimately. And our athletes as well are using the product in really uncompromising situations.
Mm.
In big mountain terrain where you can really feel the difference between a zipper that has like a backing behind it, that allows wind through versus not.
Mm.
So those sorts of things. There's a lot of iterations, and it can be a really slow, frustrating process as an athlete. There, be like, just give me the innovation, give me the new product. But before they actually put it out to market, there's a lot of iterations that go into it.
Yeah, it goes through a lot of rigorous testing. I think that's my favorite part about any textile made product is like you're talking about the very fine details, just the sewing patterns, the amount of stitching or the size of the thread and making sure that everything just fits so nicely where you're not having extra thread hanging off at the end and all that extra stuff. Like yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
Totally. No, I mean,
It's a
and so much goes into talking about material choices. Take a running shoe, for instance. Like there's big emphasis right now on like supercritical foams and things like that, and that's awesome. But if it's not designed and finished properly, if the upper doesn't work well, it doesn't matter
yeah,
how
it's
good your
useless.
midsole is. Yeah,
Yeah,
like, the shoe will not perform. Ultimately, it needs to be incredibly comfortable and highly functional.
yeah, yeah. Cool, man. So next question, I want to go back a little bit to, I guess, what is this going to be 2 years after this lightning strike event? You have another crazy accident in 2016 involving 100 feet of drop. So what happened, if you don't mind me asking that story?
Yeah, so I was racing, at ultra marathons and mountain running races at quite a high level for a long time, but I was starting to get a little bit burnt out on the racing and just sort of was lacking a little bit of motivation in the pure racing environment. And I was getting more and more drawn towards mountaineering and alpinism. So my technical skills were increasing. And I was lucky being at Arc'teryx to be surrounded by some of the best mountain athletes in the world. And as I was saying, I was getting more into rock climbing at the time. And Athletes like Kilian Jornet, he was one of the best mountain runners of all time, and he's also a very serious alpinist. We're starting to really blur the line between like alpinism and mountain running. And so rather than, be out on these trails, and I start being more interested by different ridge lines. And so I started, adding more scrambling into my runs, followed by a
Mm.
little bit of like light soloing, and, we bring some ropes and stuff. And so I started to get more interested in this combining, um, not like pure technical difficulty, but adding technical difficulty into my runs and trying to find really beautiful ways of linking up different ridge lines and looking at maps and stuff. And looking at traditional alpine routes and seeing if we could do it, in a much faster style. So rather than take 3 days to do an alpine route, could you do it in like 6 hours? And one way you can do that is by adding some running efficiency, paring down your gear quite a bit, or
Hmm.
practicing on the route as well, going and trying those sections in a safe way, and um, really learning them and dialing them in, and then paring your gear down. So in 2016, I had this dream to do this big link up in an area called Rogers Pass, British Columbia. It's sort of the birthplace of mountaineering in Canada. And the idea was to do this big ridge link up. It was going to be about 50 or 60K, so 30 or 40 miles.
Yeah.
But the entire thing was going to be on exposed ridgeline with some like glacier crossing. Not like the climbing difficulty isn't that difficult. It's like 5, 6, but with insane exposure. So basically, if you fall, you die. Kind of train for large parts of it. And um, the one thing with when you're moving in that type of environment fast is you're removing an element of safety. You have to compromise somewhere, and so you try to do something that's well within your technical competence. So while the moves may not be difficult, you try to, control variables as much as possible. You make sure the weather's lined up, you make sure your
Mm.
partners are lined up, ensure your motivation is there, that you have basically the bare minimum amount of gear to survive and get through the route. Because carrying any extra gram really has an impact on you, but
Hmm.
there's some stuff you just really need. So we had, like ice axes, like really lightweight crampons, a little bit of like very lightweight rope and like really lightweight harnesses. And we were wearing helmets because there is a little bit of loose rock on the route. And so I was out with two friends of mine who are incredibly competent mountain athletes, really, really skilled mountain runners and skilled alpinists and climbers themselves. And as we started along this ridge line, we were maybe 3 or 4 peaks in, so like relatively early in the day of this like 14 or 16 peak link up, depending on how you count the peaks.
Hmm.
And I was having a little bit of a low point. We've been going for about 3 hours at this point, and so early on in the day, but you still get these highs and lows. Especially this is a little bit before um, we were fueling was as big a factor. We were sort of a little
Yeah.
bit low on a little bit lower on
Low on the
carbs back
carbs.
then. So
Yeah.
yeah, you'd go for a few hours and stop and eat some food and have a drink of water and then keep going, as opposed to like the constant fueling. Um, anyway, we were going up this sort of fourth to low fifth class scramble, and my two friends had gone in front of me, and I was more or less following their line when all of a sudden I was kind of rushing a little bit and didn't properly test one of my handholds and pulled out essentially a microwave sized block. And
Oh
next thing
my
I knew, I
goodness.
was falling backwards. And hard to know exactly how far I fell, but it was a couple hundred feet. It wasn't a straight fall. It was kind of ledgy. So I was tumbling backwards
Mm.
down this clip end, and I was positive I was going to die.
Wow.
And my two partners who were with me thought for sure I was dead. You don't typically survive a fall like that, but miraculously, I was wearing a helmet, and after falling for what felt like an eternity, and also that was happening in a blink of an eye, I found myself at the base of this rock wall, looking up at it, and I could just see a big pool of blood underneath me. I was face down in a mound of scree, and I remember I didn't like seeing the blood, and so I pushed myself up and rolled onto my back, and just instantly just felt this like shearing pain through my entire body. And luckily I had, two of the best mountain athletes in the world with me. But they thought they were coming down for a body recovery when they saw me fall.
Mm,
So they climbed back down to me and could hear me moaning and screaming. And, we did have a little inReach, so a little emergency beacon with us. And we had noticed that there was cell signal up on the ridge before us. So one of the guys deployed the inReach, the other one went up and was able to call search and rescue. And luckily, because we'd stacked sort of the weather in our favor for this day,
they
they
could
were
get you.
able to come out and, search and rescue was able to come out and recover me relatively quickly within a couple hours. And I got flown out of there and taken to hospital where it turned out I'd broken my T8 to T11 vertebra and I'd sheared off the top of my iliac crest, which is the top of my hip bone.
Mm,
I'd broken my ankle and had like lacerations down to the bone kind of across my body, but I was conscious. I wasn't paralyzed. I went in for surgery and they put a pin in my hip and they put two metal rods into my back and yeah, started the slow recovery back from there.
Jeez, is it hard to tell that story?
Yeah, it is for sure. I still get flashbacks to falling and no, it's one of those things that, it obviously it changed my life like quite dramatically in many ways, positive and negative.
Mm,
And but I also think it's important not to forget those moments as well, even because there's things to be learned from them. The way I approached the mountains and was moving in the mountains at the time, and maybe there was some arrogance to what I was looking to do.
mm,
Maybe I was trying to do something that was above my competence at the time, or my skill level. It's hard to know exactly, but
sure.
um, as I say, there are also like positives that came from these things, and I think it's important to analyze the accidents and try to learn from them, because
Yeah.
otherwise it's just a shitty thing that happened to you.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, the post-traumatic stress in the very realist sense, like I can only imagine, when I've wrecked on my bike, like it takes a while to get confidence back to, just
Right.
trust your tires and the things like that. So you're like, but this has to do with, there's not a whole lot of gear involved. It's more like who you are as an individual. So did you find it hard to come back to a level of like trust in yourself and the ability that you could have again?
Yeah, and sort of the way I did that is I went back to fundamentals. Go back and talk to a lot of people who sort of like mountain guides and friends of mine who are like professional climbers, and once again doing like a big assessment of things I did wrong. And then going back out with ropes and really slowing things down and getting back into the mountains in a sort of more calculated way and progressing
Mm,
back up to ultimately having a broader skill set. And then also just learning that, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast, if that makes sense.
yeah.
I was rushing at the time. I wasn't testing my holds properly, which are, especially in like super high consequence terrain like that. Those are just mistakes you can't be making. So
Yeah.
I essentially cut a corner and I
Yeah.
paid the price for it.
Mm, what a price to pay.
But fortunately, I'm around to be able to learn the lesson from it, and being able to recover to a relatively high level of physical ability. I still had pain in my hip. My ankle still bugs me at times, but those are really small prices to pay, and relative to what the outcome could have been. I've lost quite a few friends in the mountains, and I've had other friends who've had really bad, have had limbs amputated or have ended up, paraplegic or quadriplegic based on
Yeah.
mountain accidents. So the mountains are pretty unforgiving terrain.
Yeah.
So one thing with that style of movement is it's really rich. You get these incredibly rich experiences, but it can also be, really, really freaking dangerous.
Yeah. Mm. Has because there's a number of other things like you've experienced so much as it comes to the mountains and like the dangers of them, getting struck by lightning, falling, obviously. Um, like I read, like tragically, you lost, your previous wife in an avalanche. Do you ever get just like tired of the mountains?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. Ah, yeah, it's a delicate dance. Like as I say, they give me quite a lot. There's a lot of richness in them, and I've had like really deep experiences in the mountains, but yeah, they do come at quite a heavy price, and I do at times, kind of wonder why I keep getting drawn back to the mountains, and yeah, especially things like backcountry skiing, which are it can be really really dangerous, but they also have I don't know. I've had some of my highest moments and some of my lowest moments in the mountains, and it is a balance, and there's an incredible beauty in them, and um, but also a lot of potential pain. Like the mountains just don't really care, though. Ultimately, that's
Yeah.
kind of what it comes down to. Is it's not the mountain's fault. It's sort of how you interact with the mountains that can
Mm.
have the impact. And I find what I'm drawn to do in the mountains is changed quite dramatically. I feel like I've stepped way, way back from the direction I was going, and also who I go into. I'm very, very selective with who I go into the mountains with, or and then what I'm doing with different people in the mountains as well.
Mm.
Like I won't go into really high consequence terrain with people I don't trust. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I feel like that gives you like the ultimate ability to judge and weigh a person's worth in terms of not only, I mean, obviously the technical skills are a huge piece of it and very important, but I would imagine, yeah, if you can't like mentally connect with that person in the same light, like it'd be very difficult to walk into any type of potential near death situation
yeah,
and have that.
yeah. Or the ability to feel that you can communicate openly with them about
Mm,
what your fears are, what potential risks and hazard you're facing, and I think just being very open and honest about, especially when you're with a group. Are you discussing sort of what the objectives are for the day? Are you discussing what your combined risk tolerance is, what your individual risk tolerance is, what gear you're planning on bringing? I kind of have a rule that if you've asked yourself twice, should we be doing this, it's probably time to bail, and like being willing to turn around, not being purely objective focused and, like outcome focused in what you're doing in the mountains, because the weather could change on you, or the conditions that you expected could be variable. So you're constantly just analyzing, does what you do make sense? And I think
yeah.
being much more flexible with your plans when you're going into the mountains makes a really big difference. Like
Mm,
the most dangerous thing you can do is to be purely objective focused.
yeah.
So people
And
call
not
it summit
adjust.
fever, that kind of stuff. And I think you really need to be adjusting your plans and be able to find satisfaction and pleasure in a variety of ways of moving in the mountains. I think will ultimately give you the richest experience there. One of the objectives could be summiting the mountain. Another
Mm,
one could just be going for a hike at the base of the mountain. Another one could just be sketching the mountain from
yeah.
from the
From
chalet
the view. Yeah,
and
yeah,
at the
yeah.
base of the mountain. And
Yeah.
those are all very wonderful ways of interacting with them.
Mm, mm. Well, not to continue to dwell on the negative. But I feel like this is an important part because when I was researching you, just going through your Instagram, the amount of dedicated posts that you have to your late wife was a really sobering thing. And so for you to know, like when I was 16, like I lost my father to suicide. So it's obviously a much different situation. But anytime you lose someone, it has a profound effect on how we view the world and how we interact with the world and how we're able to kind of move forward. And it's just such a complicated topic. So I guess I will ask this question, but if you don't feel comfortable answering it, like that's totally fine. But what is it like to lose a wife?
Yeah. No, and thanks for sharing that about your dad, and I'm really sorry that you went through that. And
Thank you. Appreciate it.
yeah, no, I mean, it was, it's terrible. It's horrible in every possible way. I mean, for context, I was backcountry skiing with Laura, with another friend of ours is a ski guide, and ultimately she got buried in an avalanche. And while we were able to, um, get to her, she ended up dying the following day, and you know, it just raises so many questions. It was in theory just kind of like a bit of a casual ski day. And it had the worst possible outcome. And we were doing something that we both deeply loved and shared together. And she got buried under like more than 12 feet of snow. And it took us quite a long time to get to her and pull her out. And yeah, so that has, and I sat with her as she essentially, died.
Mm.
Um, which yeah, has like a terrible impact on you. You're supposed to save the ones you love, and I wasn't able to do that. And then also the impact that had on her family, my family, our broader community was, really sobering, and it just made
Mm.
me question a lot. Like I loved Laura deeply, like we were very, very much in sync, and we shared incredible moments together. And I feel so fortunate to have had her as part of my life, and to come home to our home that essentially she put together. Was really sobering. There's just like reminders of her everywhere, and
Mm.
but she had this like really deep richness to how she approached life, and that really has impacted me. And I try to keep that memory of how she wanted to live, and how she tried to live, really, really present, and try to keep her, part of who I am. But at the same time, one of the things that she had said, she had this like deep love for life and this deep richness of life, and really wanted to just curiosity for everything. And as part of that, it's, even though it's been a struggle, and I had my own experience with, a suicide attempt,
Mm.
a few years ago as part of this,
Mm.
and it, ultimately, you know, the best way of honoring her is trying to continue to live a full and rich and happy life, and try to pursue, I don't know, just to really ultimately just keep living. And so that's sort of being the big takeaway. But yeah, it's like it's hell, is ultimately the
Yeah.
only real way of describing it. And I don't know if I'm not sure how much time you spent, thinking about suicide. And like I never thought I'd be somebody who'd commit suicide. Like
Mm.
by all metrics, I've lived like a very rich and deep life. And ultimately following a series of cascading events and not really, kind of looking after myself properly.
Yeah.
I literally I hadn't slept for a few days, and ultimately, went upstairs and just sort of grabbed whatever pill was on the table and swallowed them, and instantly realized I made a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
called for help right away. But in sort of analyzing it, it was a solution. It's like
Yeah.
it's a shitty solution, but it
Rest.
was a
Yeah.
solution. It was like a way out of the pain and despair that I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It is a way of sort of ending that. Um, it's, and so I have a lot of empathy for who I was
At
in
that
that
place.
moment. And luckily, I was able to catch myself. I was taken to hospital, and I was given the choice to go into a psychiatric ward or not, which is once again, it's kind of like a totally fucked up thing. It's like here I am, a professional athlete, a lawyer, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're being asked if you're willing to commit yourself to a psychiatric ward. Like,
Yeah.
dear Lord. But I ultimately, I thought about it, and I was like, okay, if I had a broken bone, I would go to
Mm.
physiotherapy. I would
Yeah.
commit myself to fix it. In this case, I have a broken head and I have a broken heart. I need to commit to fixing it.
Mm.
And the best place of doing that at that moment was in this intensive psychiatric ward.
Yeah.
Um, Being in there, which you have to swallow a lot of ego to do it, but it's ultimately like ego is also potentially going to get me killed, if I didn't
Right.
um, go down that path. And while I was in there, you're meeting these people who are, whose lives are like really, really difficult.
Mm.
And ultimately, I realized that I was fortunate that I had a potential path out of there, whereas a lot of people there, this was going to be their fate long term. And that was, it's hard to see that. But I committed to trying to heal as best I could and spend my time there. And ultimately, is where I went there to stabilize,
Mm.
and do that in a secure way.
Yeah.
And I was only in there for, I want to say maybe 5 days, maybe a week. So hard. I don't really remember. kind of, it's funny, like time
Time
frame is gone,
dilation.
and
Yeah.
yeah. But ultimately I was discharged back out, and in that time I made a number of choices. I decided it was healthiest for me to leave the home that Laura and I had together. It
Hmm.
just wasn't a healthy place for me to be. I still own it, but I left that community as well. And I was living in Canmore, Alberta, which is just outside of Banff and Calgary area, and
Yeah.
moved out to Squamish at that point, where I knew I had like a strong community of friends,
Mm.
and so made that trek 4 years ago.
Mm. Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. I don't even have to ask the question. Is it hard to tell that story? Because I know it. I know it is. And you asked it a little bit. How do I feel about suicide? I've come a long way with how I've dealt with that question. Because I have more of a religious background, and there is, the jury has been out on what people think suicide is or isn't, and how that would affect any level of like afterlife salvation. And I've come to the conclusion that, whatever happens in terms of a religious context, I'm at peace with. But what's more important is just understanding the frame of mind that my father was in when that kind of a thing happened, because he grew up with a life that was much worse in terms of experiences that I ever had. And he afforded me by working very hard, him and my mother, to give me a life that like they had never been able to live, and, kind of climbing the ladder, as you will. And I think it was probably, so that happened when I was 16. When I was probably 20, 23 was probably the age when I really was able to step aside from seeing my parents as just my parents and seeing them as humans. And in that perspective shift, like my dad, just knowing that he struggled very deeply with, like you were saying, because through things that I've gone through, I've gotten to a place where I would consider like, oh, this is what clinical depression feels like, or this is what like a deep depressive state feels like. And waking up in the morning and feeling okay for a few minutes, and then immediately like this cloud like covers my perspective, and my, like you said, a head and heart thing, like my heart just feels completely compressed. Like being able to have that perspective and realize like, wow, that's a terrible place to be. And whenever someone is in like terrible physical pain, most people don't want to live. And I would say that to a degree, like mental anguish and pain is like almost as hard, if not harder, than enduring that physical pain. Because with physical pain, at least you can point to it. It's like with mental pain, you can't. So like I've come to a place to have a lot of love and respect. And like my wife has struggled, with some depression stuff and like early in our marriage and whatnot. And it's given me a lot more of an ability to like empathize and love those people, because man, like life is so freaking hard. And like I've thought about, because of like how my dad passed, like, oh, am I gonna lose my wife someday, or am I gonna lose my sister, am I gonna lose my mom, or all this stuff. And you kind of like, at least I think like, oh, I need to prepare myself, but that's kind of an unhealthy way to look at it. So I can't even fully grasp with what you felt, other than to say like, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you checked yourself in and were able to kind of like move through that. And yeah, 5 years is not a very long time to be removed from such a thing. But I am really encouraged by your story, because it sounds like you have, and you talk a lot about like the importance of support systems, especially around injury, mental or physical. And like I'm glad that someone like you exists that can like tell these stories and share it with others, to give them hopefully like light through those dark tunnels and the things that they have to persevere through.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is maybe one thing that my upbringing in Africa and in Nigeria,
Mm,
people live like incredibly challenging lives in places like that, and they just endure like crazy hardships,
yeah.
and they probably will. Like there's, a lot of them don't really have like a clean path out, but yet they can also have this incredible ability to just like laugh and love and live life in such a rich way.
Yeah.
And I think I was really lucky to be exposed to that at a young age, and I do draw on that. And also in weird ways, I do draw on my experiences as an athlete to, sort of
Hmm.
try to navigate, the challenges of life. And once again, I'm really lucky to have physical outlets. But the one thing I did, sort of going back to the art and these other forms of expression, when I was holed up in the hospital bed after breaking my back and my hip, I realized that I only had one outlet. Like I only had my physical outlet, and
Find another.
in that deep time of need, I didn't have that outlet. Um, and that's when I started, doing some sketching and, and getting more involved in writing.
Mm,
And because I was like, I need to, like, I have to let this out somehow.
yeah.
And so it ultimately kind of made me a bit of a richer person. And I did,
Mm,
and same with, after Laura passed, it was also during COVID. So there was like there was a lot of kind of just general weirdness in the world at the time.
yeah. No kidding.
And like a real challenge in connecting with people. And, the way I was forced to stay, in Canmore, and under normal circumstances, I probably would have traveled and left, but that just wasn't an option at the time.
Mm,
So, posting and sharing was kind of a way of me keeping her memory alive, which felt really important to me. But then also, it was also just a way of like connecting with people outside of that and sort of feeling support in a time when I just, you literally couldn't like hug or
yeah.
touch people. It was just a weird time in the world.
Yeah. No kidding.
And I was isolated from, family as well at the time,
Yeah.
in a time when I really kind of needed it the most. So that's where a large part of that sharing came. And there's also been this kind of this weird, like positive reinforcement loop because, you start sharing, people reach out to you and, say positive things, which feels good. So you do
Mm,
more of it. And then maybe you lose a little bit of the reason behind why you did it initially. Like
mm,
it's, once again, I could psychoanalyze these things for a very long time. But ultimately I'm heartened to know that it has potentially impacted some people in a positive way. Laura was a GP, like she was a family doc.
okay.
She had a really deep impact on the community, and on her friends and everything. And just knowing a very small degree that maybe I've been able to help somebody in their own journey. It doesn't help make the situation feel right, but at least it
Mhm.
feels like I'm giving back to the world. And
Yeah.
because I also received a lot of love and support from a lot of people, and um, it feels nice to be able to pay that forward, even to just a really small degree.
Yeah. Mm. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I just have one final question for you because I know you got to go. Um, how has or what does success look like given the life of experience that you've had and what you said the first vision of going off to that camp was like, oh, I'm going to be world champion in 6 months. And obviously at the ripe wisdom that you have accrued over the years now, like what does it look like to you now?
Oh, I mean, I think it means different things in different aspects of my life, but I think ultimately staying curious in the things that you're doing, continuing to evolve. It'd be really sad if I was the same person I was when I was 19.
Mm,
It's incredible I still get to evolve as a person. I still get to have like really deep, rich experiences out in the world. But ultimately, having a really rich community of, loved ones, family, support systems. I'm really, I used to feel the need to have to go and like move and travel. And I'm really appreciative these days of having a really solid place to come home to.
mm,
That really means a lot to me. With Cassie, my current partner, I'm really lucky to have that form of support in her. And just like really deep friendships in the community I'm part of, and that's at work as well as um,
mm,
just in other areas of my life. So just being able to live like a very rich, full, deep, meaningful life is
yeah.
ultimately what success means.
Family, friends.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, I don't know you for very long, but I have gotten to know you a good bit in the last hour and 22 minutes. And I would say, like, you're a great man. Really appreciate you taking the time to share just the different things you've got going on, even from just a little bit of a lens. It's been uplifting to me. I'm sure it will be to others as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to have the conversation and share from such a vulnerable place. It means a lot to me.
Oh, thanks, Seth. And yeah, and same to you. You also shared some deep, meaningful personal things, and that goes a long way as well. And having these conversations, and yeah, I really admire anybody who explores curiosity, and starting a podcast is part of that. So, you did
Amen.
not ask a single stupid question, so I'm a little bit, I
No,
was I was
upset.
feel misled.
Well, good. It's still working then. Oh, well, thanks, man.
Right on. Thanks a lot. Okay, best of luck to you.
Yeah, man.
Cheers.
Thank you so much to Adam for coming on the podcast, sharing so much and so vulnerably about his life. I really appreciate it. I love going deep with people. I love hearing their stories, as you guys know. And it is just my sincere hope and prayer, really, that these podcasts will go out to continue to help inspire and help people out of dark, mired situations they might find themselves in. So thank you so much, Adam, for all you do and for sharing. If you guys made it to this point in the podcast, just want to say thank you so much. If you'd like to sign up for the newsletter, check out the show notes below. It can take you to the website to do that. If you are on YouTube, if you could like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. If you are listening on Apple Pods or Spotify podcasts, wherever you are, if you could like, review, and comment there as well, it really continues to help grow this podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you again to Adam for coming on. And when asking Adam a little bit at the end there about what does success look like, really what it comes down to, according to him, is family and friends in that community and support system. So get out there, make some good friends, and keep your family around.